You got to own your stuff. When Brooklyn went and got James Harden, added to Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, we all know that James Harden, we're not really sure what kind of postseason player he is. Boy, he's a great regular season player. He's healthy, gives you 80 games. He plays his butt off, he gives you 35. He was an insurance policy because your big money is on KD and Kyrie, right? That's you're betting on them. So you bring James Harden in knowing that KD is brittle. Shocker, he's hurt again. And Kyrie, you never know what night he shows up and what doesn't. We've seen that this year. So James Harden is an insurance policy. Everybody thinks, oh, you're stacking the deck. But when you invest in KD and Kyrie, you just want to make sure if they're hurt, you get to the playoffs. And James Harden, I mean, look at Houston now without Harden. They're a mess. Harden is so gifted, he'll get you to the playoffs. He may not do anything there, but he'll get you there, and then KD and Kyrie are healthy. That's the reality. Brooklyn owned it. KD gets hurt, Kyrie's not trustable. Harden will get us to where we need to go, and then hopefully the band's back together for the playoffs. This is now the Lakers' new reality. I don't think it's a coincidence. LeBron went 17 years with no injuries. Now he suffered his second in 3 years, and AD's always hurt. And based on last year, what looks like the Lakers' recipe for success in championships is AD and LeBron get a bunch of time off, show up to the playoffs, and they're great. Now, you'd rather it not be for a calf injury like AD, but he's out for another 3 weeks. It'll be over 2 months. Kind of a semi-blessing. It's not a career-threatening injury. LeBron, you wish it wasn't a high ankle sprain, but he'll be out for a month or more. He'll be rested. I mean, remember, LeBron didn't want to play in the All-Star game. He wanted rest. He's like, this condensed schedule is too much. He knew what was happening. He's like, my body needs rest. He didn't want to be in the All-Star game, but he's a good sport. So the reality is the Lakers need a third star. It's not stacking the deck. This is why I've been a big proponent of Bradley Beal. I don't know if Bradley Beal would be a great playoff player. I know Harden isn't. I don't know if Bradley Beal would, but he's a great regular season guy. Bradley Beal gives you 80 games a year. So you bring Bradley Beal in, and if an AD who's brittle gets hurt and LeBron is aging, you got Bradley Beal in there to drop 40 a night, keep you relevant, keep you as a top 4 or 5 seed in the West. And then when AD and LeBron come back for the playoffs, you're ready to win a championship. That is the reality when you have an AD or a KD. They're not built for 82 games. It's okay. Big Ben last year wasn't very good when they asked him to throw 60 times. He's much better when they ask him to throw 24. Lamar Jackson's probably better when you ask him to throw 29. There's nothing wrong with that. There's certain running backs. They're not built to take a beating. Some running backs are smaller, more slight. They're not built to do 37 carries like Derrick Henry, who's like a refrigerator rolling downhill, or Adrian Peterson, who just can play forever. Not every running back's like that. So I think when you get an AD or a KD and you know they're brittle, and then you have a LeBron who's aging and a Kyrie who can be a little inconsistent, the Harden and the Bradley Beals it's okay. You see this with baseball teams all the time, where they have a couple of really good starters, but they got a lot of innings in them, and they're good postseason pitchers. And about July or early August, they put them on like the DL, 15-day, 20-day DL, save their arms. They got a little tendonitis. We know they're great for the playoffs. It's not a career-threatening injury. Let's put them on the shelf. Let's get them rested for September and October. And so I do think the Lakers need to go after a third star. Listen, Brooklyn just owned it. I mean, Brooklyn's not stupid. They're like, listen, KD gets hurt. Kyrie, I don't know. Harden will get us to the playoffs. Hopefully they all then can join, and you have a great run. And I do think if you have to be honest about it, remember, is once all the Lakers need to do is get into the playoffs, because it's strange after all these years, but nobody in the West really. Utah doesn't, Denver doesn't, Portland doesn't, Phoenix doesn't. None of them really have a LeBron defender on the wing. It's kind of the weakness of the team. And so all you got to do for the Lakers is just get into the playoffs. You can either be an 8 seed and beat Utah the first week of the playoffs, or be a 2 or 3 seed and beat Utah in the 4th week of the playoffs. But I don't think it's the end of the road for the Lakers. I think in a weird way, this is their recipe. Give AD 2.5 months off in the regular season, and LeBron wanted time off. You wish it wasn't a high ankle sprain, but I don't think it hurts or dims their playoff chances at all. In a weird way, it's kind of LeBron out for 6 weeks kind of the best way to get his best game come May and June. Per the Brooklyn Nets, Kyrie will not accompany the team on their 3-game road trip to tend to a family matter. That's why James Harden has been so valuable. If KD's brittle, Kyrie, there's these personal situations, and James Harden puts the team on his back, now leads the NBA in assists, gives you 30 a night. That's what I say with the Lakers. AD's brittle, LeBron's getting older. Do you need a Bradley Beal? It's like an insurance policy to make sure. I mean, you got now, AD just signed a new deal for, I think, 5 years. I think that was a long contract, so it's an insurance policy. You need to ensure that when AD, who gets hurt, or KD, who gets hurt, are off, what's your insurance policy? Harden's it for Brooklyn. Lakers don't really have one. Chris Broussard's now joining us live. I mean, I'll be honest. I think Harden's shocked me how engaged he is. I mean, he's never been a great defensive player, but he's now a very good distributor. The culture is very unselfish. This Kyrie story is, at some point, you just have to come to terms with what people are. I've said this. Kevin Durant's brittle. Anthony Davis is brittle. Kyrie is inconsistent. And when I hear that story, I think this is kind of, if you're trying to redefine him, couldn't I just make the argument that Kyrie's going to have 4 or 5 of these a year, right? Like he's got a family matter to tend to.
When I first saw that he was going to be off and not knowing it was a family issue, I wanted to go off. I was ready to be like, this is ridiculous, because in the past 2 or 3 weeks, we've seen Kyrie just take a day off. I mean, they've put an injury on it, but I've been like, okay, he'll be back for the next game and he'll drop 35. And that's what he does because he's not hurt. So he's taking these games off, and I felt like they need to play as much as possible together. They don't need to be taking rest days, but it's a family matter. I know Kyrie's family. His dad's a great guy. So I'm going to, give them the benefit of the doubt. They got to deal with something for the family. But that is one of the only question marks you could have about the Nets is Kyrie's mental state. Because a few, months ago when he took that 2-week hiatus or whatever you want to call it, that wasn't all family related. Some of it perhaps, but some of it was, him being upset about what happened in D.C. So those are, I hope Kyrie can remain engaged and steady throughout the entire season. I hope that he's fine playing off the ball most of the time and letting James Harden be the quarterback and point guard, because that's when they're at their best. That's one of the few questions. If Kyrie stays engaged mentally, I don't know who's stopping them once Durant gets back.
Yeah, it's really interesting with James Harden, who, again, I used to think was kind of disengaged and selfish. When I look at James Harden now, I'm like, well, I don't trust KD's health, and Kyrie's missing more games. James Harden has come out of this thinking, I'm like, he's the heart and soul of the team. He feels very much to me like Steph Curry. I don't love him on the defensive end, but if there's injuries, if there's stuff, you could always trust Steph. Steph would always kind of bring it together. I kind of think Harden's become that. I really do think he's the heart and soul of the team right now. I really do.
Well, first of all, on the court, Colin, he is playing the point guard position. Some of the best point guard play we've seen ever. And I meant to say that, ever, not just right now. He is playing some of the best point guard that we've ever seen. He's being unselfish. He's not over dribbling. The ball is moving. Oh, and when you need him to, he'll give you 40. He is awesome. And I knew he had these skills. We saw him in Oklahoma City, when he was a young kid there with Durant and Westbrook. And you kind of saw him in Houston early on. And then when D'Antoni got there, he just became this scoring machine. But I knew he had these abilities. When they came together, this big three, I said, look, if they're smart, they'll have Harden at the point guard, Kyrie at the 2, and let Durant do his thing in the front court. They figured that out. And I'm not surprised at how well he's running the offense, because this is who he is. And to your point, the unselfishness has become contagious. That ball is moving.
Yep.
Bruce Brown, Nick Claxton, Joe Harris, Jeff Green, these guys are getting their touches, and so they're happy. So what are they doing? They're hustling on the defensive end, and that's made them a decent defensive team. I think over the last month and a half, They're about 14th in the league defensively, and that's all they need to be when they have that type of offense. So I agree with you. Harden is the heart and soul of the team, at least at this point. And look, in the playoffs, we question him, right? Will he be there in a big game? Well, you got Kyrie for
That's
that.
right. That's
and
right.
You got KD
That's right.
for that. So I think Harden will be a great distributor and still give you 20-something. So good for him that people are able to see this side of him.
Yeah, no question. I flipped. He used to drive me nuts, but I think he's been a very engaged player. And I was saying this last night, that when you get KD and Kyrie, Harden's the world's most talented insurance policy. We don't know if he's good in the postseason, but he's a great regular season guy who can totally carry a franchise. I mean, Houston's now awful. And I look and I think of this. KD has some similarities to AD. Hurt a lot. LeBron's now aging. Now he's much more emotionally dependable than Kyrie, but now he's had his second serious injury in 3 years. And it makes me think the Lakers need to go out and get a third star, because we know if you get into the playoffs with LeBron, you're going to be fine. But he is aging, and AD is brittle. And I wonder if the Lakers look at the Brooklyn model and think, we go get a Bradley Beal. We don't know how good he is in the postseason. We don't know. But he can get us in the playoffs if AD's hurt as LeBron ages. And that Brooklyn model now, I wonder with LeBron's injury, do the Lakers look at that and think, maybe that's the model when you have a brittle star and an aging star?
Well, no, I think that's a great point. And I also think there's another angle to it, Colin. If Brooklyn's as good as we think they are, and we all seem to think KD's just going to fit in seamlessly for the most part, then I don't know who's beating them. And just from a competitive standpoint, if this goes as a lot of people think it will, and Brooklyn wins the championship, then the Lakers are going to have to figure out how can we compete with them. So they do need to do everything they can. I think Bradley Beal would be the perfect guy. Now, I don't know how they get that done. I don't see the assets on their team to get a Bradley Beal. Obviously, you're not giving up LeBron or AD, but he would be the perfect guy for them to go get. They're going to need a big three to try to compete with that Brooklyn monster. So they got to go out and get somebody to aid their two superstars.
Listen, I've always thought that I'm not into the most valuable player award. I think it's mostly about stories and stats. But it is interesting. LeBron's now hurt. And when KD and Kyrie come back, Harden's not going to be as productive. We know that. How about let's go the opposite? Let's go for the player that is shoots mid-rangers, isn't flashy, doesn't dunk, isn't in the headlines. What about what Chris Paul has done this year? They are 20-5, best record in the league. This was a roster that none of it tied together, none of it cinched up. He has walked into this franchise. How about Chris Paul? And I don't even like MVP topics. How about him for MVP?
Well, and he makes great commercials, too, so there's that. But look, Colin, this is going to be a year where there's an odd MVP winner. Usually LeBron being out the next 3 or 4 weeks, Embiid being out 2 weeks or whatever, usually that would take them out of the race because that's too many games to miss. But the other MVP leaders aren't, their teams aren't winning a ton of games. Giannis, you usually wouldn't give him 3 in a row with his postseason struggles, but other guys are hurt. And, like I said, some guys don't have great records. Could Damian Lillard be in the run with his team in the 6th position or 5th position because he's playing so well? So it's going to be a strange MVP award. So to that point, I do think Chris Paul now is emerging as a legitimate contender for the award. Now, I had him as a contender. I don't remember the year, but when he was in New Orleans, he had a tremendous year one year. I think LeBron may have won it that year. I don't remember who won it. But he's been in the running before. But to your point, look, people look at the numbers. I think he's at about 16 points, 8 assists. But the impact he's having on that team is tremendous. And this is a year where it's not going to be your typical winner. And so if they end up with, I don't know if they can have the top seed in the West, But just the second seed, because Utah doesn't have a contender for MVP. He has a shot.
Yeah.
I mean, my front runner right now would be Harden. But Chris Paul is right there in the top 5 with Giannis, Jokic, Lillard. And then I think Luka, if Dallas keeps playing well and winning, he could move back into the race. But, yeah, Chris Paul is legitimately in the race.
Yeah, he's my kind of MVP. Defense, snarky, yells at people. It's my kind of guy.
Old school.
Old school.
I like the old school. I'm with you.
Yeah, good stuff. Chris,
we can't be so sensitive now.
Yeah, everybody is so sensitive these days. All right, Chris, appreciate it, buddy.